Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and in today's video, we're going to be going over the final jungle tier list for Season 13. Season 14 is right around the corner, so make sure that you abuse these picks for the last couple of weeks of ranked while you have the chance. Also, if you aren't subbed to the GameLeap YouTube channel, now is the time to do that. We're going to be pumping out a ton of videos for Season 14 in the coming weeks. I don't want you guys to miss any of them. As always, these tier lists are aimed for people that are trying to climb to Diamond, not for Diamond and above. Let's go ahead and get right into this video, starting off with C tier. C tier junglers are going to be ones that have an extreme amount of trouble ganking or those that can barely clear on their own. The jungle is in a relatively balanced state at the moment where there's a lot of really good junglers and then some that really stand out as being terrible. Most of the terrible picks are champions that Riot tries to shoehorn into jungle, things like Darius and Zed. These champions simply function better on a higher economy, where they're able to interact with their opponents and then bully them out from there. In the jungle, you lose those opportunities and you're forced to play them as a primary carry. The problem with this is that a damage-focused kit is simply outclassed by other damage-focused kits. Kha'Zix does everything that Zed does but better. His slows are more impactful, his single target damage is way stronger, and he's just as slippery without having to work nearly as hard for his lead. He's also better than Zed without items just because his kit is designed specifically for the jungle and he's not been shoehorned into it. The only exception to this role would be Sejuani, and Sejuani has been intentionally overnerfed by Riot to keep her out of pro play. If you're a Sejuani player, I'm sorry to say, but most of these C tier junglers are not worth your time. Do not pick them. There is always a champion that does something better in a more simple manner. Now that we've gone over the C tier, let's go ahead and talk about B tier junglers. Viego is a great example of a B or average tier jungler in my opinion. In lower elo games, especially for those of you that don't have a solid grasp of what every champion does, Viego is quite frankly not that effective. Master Yi and Viego share a similar playstyle, but the kits are vastly different. On Yi, we can dive in and we can continue fighting over and over and over again, whereas on Viego, we have to pick up a body, know what that body does, make use of it effectively, keep track of our ultimate, make sure that our normal Viego ultimate is up, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of things to track. This champion is by no means weak. He is very strong when you're able to pilot most champions to a certain extent. However, when we're trying to climb or maybe we're learning the game, he is not worth the time investment. It's better spent on another jungler. This is the story for a lot of the champions that are in average tier. Champions like Nidalee have an average or below average win rate for the amount of time that we have to invest just to understand her baseline mechanics, whereas something like Xin Zhao is quite simple but easy to counter, which seats him firmly in the middle of the pack. All of the picks for B tier are lackluster at the current moment in time. They simply cannot exert themselves on the map like the rest of the jungler roster can, and it is shown largely in their win rate. Win rate, of course, isn't everything. There's a lot of determining factors here, such as ease of use, accessibility, and overall strength in the meta. That goes ahead and sums it up for B tier. Let's go ahead and move on to A tier. The A tier is where we finally start reaching our good junglers. These champions are going to be pretty effective, even in the hands of a newer player. A great example of this is Nunu. His playstyle is pretty linear. We either want to go for spam ganks, or we want to go and control objectives as best we can. But that's all that Nunu does. He doesn't excel at anything else. If you're brand new to Nunu, then of course there is a small learning curve for figuring out how this snowball works. All it's going to take to figure it out though is going to be 1 to 5 games. That being said, this simple kit is going to be effective no matter what. We don't have any crazy animation cancels, we won't have to focus on having perfect mechanics, whereas something like Lee Sin might, yet we're still able to compete with other junglers. While some of the champions in A tier might not be the most competitive, these are always going to be solid picks basically no matter what. They might have a more unique playstyle here and there, but they're easily adaptable, and then we can always invest more time into them. Nunu sits at the easiest part of this spectrum, whereas something like Lee Sin is going to be on the opposite end. Even a perfectly played Lee Sin can lose to an Olaf stat check or to a J4 spam ganking on the other side of the map, which is why he's in A tier as well. Just a quick reminder, if any of the champions in this tier list interest you, then head on over to GameLeap.com, where we have some of the best tips and tricks videos to get you onto Summoner's Rift as quickly as possible. I'll see you guys on the website. Now that we have covered the A tier, let's go ahead and talk about S tier as well as some of the picks in here. Warwick received a buff on the micro patch that came through recently, and this champion has been tearing it up. There are 2 champions in OP tier that Warwick excels against, and that's going to be Briar and Nocturne. Any champion that's capable of dueling these 2 champs is going to be a strong pick by default, since they're so damn contested. What previously held Warwick back isn't his kit's strength or his numbers, it's his bugginess. That being said, his numbers have gone up to a substantial enough point where the bugginess kinda gets overridden just a tad. This leaves us with a champ that beats 5 out of 6 of the OP tiers while also having okay matchups across the board. If mage mids and enchanter supports weren't so prevalent in the meta, I would have Warwick in OP tier along some of the other picks here. If you want an easy to play, easy to pick up jungler that's going to be ultra effective in the last couple of weeks of the season, I would highly recommend that you pick up Warwick right now. This champ in the jungle is probably the best he's ever been, and if you want free LP, then you need to collect it while you have the chance. Brand is another interesting pick that we have in S tier. I've talked about Brand Jungle in a previous video and brought up the ultra aggressive new Korean Brand strategy. Essentially what we want to be doing on a Brand is playing it similarly to we would a Kindred or a Graves. we get our buffs, then we aggressively fight the enemy jungler in the river as often as possible. We walk up, we auto attack with red buff, we apply our E, then we hold onto our Q until the enemy jungler tries to gap close onto us, we hit the Q on them, we proc our W, and we keep auto-attacking them as often as possible, reapplying that red buff. The amount of damage over time that stacks up on our opponent is going to be huge, especially with Brand's decent early game base damages. There are very few duels that will end up losing, and Brand scales like a monstrosity if he's allowed to bully people in the early game. After level 11, Brand can single-handedly win a teamfight with one well-placed combo. Name another jungler that can do that while having that kind of early game effectiveness. They are few and far between. This playstyle is awkward to learn at first. I recommend that you pick this in normals, but then when Season 14 rolls around, you'll be more than ready. Solid pick for the jungle if you're a Brand player. I wouldn't recommend picking him up in the last couple of weeks unless you're going to put a ton of games into ranked and into normals, that way you're able to learn the playstyle, but once you do, ultra strong. Lastly, I want to talk about Fiddlesticks. This champion competes with Evelynn constantly when it comes to being the best early game jungler. I highly recommend that you head on over to GameLeap.com and you watch the tips video for Fiddle as well as the clear video so you can understand just how strong this champion can be. Fiddle, despite his enthusiast playstyle, is one of the strongest AP junglers in the entire game. He permanently sits at 2% higher than average win rate in basically every single tier. The only time that it drops is an ultra high elo. If you are not an ultra high elo player, but you still want to put an AP jungler under your belt, there is no better pick in my opinion. Evelynn suffers from early game weakness, and so does Fiddle to some extent, but he's easily able to kite out his opponents and still scale into a team fighting monster. This champion's ganks are ultra easy mode post level 6, he can contest objectives incredibly easily, yet the hardest thing to learn on him is his early game jungle clear. We have Evelynn rated higher because she's easier to play, but Fiddlesticks when mastered is just as strong as an OP tier champion. I highly recommend that you give him a look-see and that you don't underestimate him. Now finally, let's go ahead and talk about OP tier, or the truly broken champions of the patch. Zac is going to be our first pick for OP tier. We just came out of a J4 meta where he was constantly spam ganking. Zac does the same thing, but he scales significantly harder than Jarvan. At level 6, it is not uncommon for Zac to E onto someone taking a turret and then kill them outright after using his QW into R combo. Zac has disgusting damage, disgusting ganks, he outscales basically every other jungle tank, and he also has good matchups into a lot of the OP tier champions. It's hard for a champion like Briar to stick herself onto a carry when she's being peeled away by Zac. This champion is massively underrated at this current moment in time, and I highly recommend that you pick him up because of this. For this champion, we want to go Aftershock followed by Ionian Boots immediately into a Sunfire Cape instead of rushing our mythic item. This is a big mistake I see a lot of Zac players making. Next, OP tier is going to be Evelynn as per usual. This champion will never be bad in solo queue due to the camouflage passive. Her stealth causes everybody on the map to constantly be on their toes, and that will force mistakes by itself. While that's great and all, Evelynn can also one-shot some of the tankiest champions in the game with barely any items. This makes her a very effective AP jungler who only has one real weakness, which is going to be the early game invades. While getting invaded early on Evelynn is the end of the world, what we can do is simply ward the opponent's buff before our buffs actually spawn, find out where we're starting, and then start the opposite end of the map. If they choose to invade our jungle, we can walk into their jungle, easy as pie, and then still scale up. Once you have this concept mastered, you will easily be able to climb on this champion. She will not hold you back in any way, shape, or form. Her kit is just impeccable for solo queue, and her numbers are beyond adequate for what she needs. Now that we covered Evelynn, let's go ahead and talk about our next pick, which is going to be Master Yi. Yi has received some of the most egregious quality of life changes that I have ever seen a champion receive. He has so many tools to keep himself strong. Longer than average auto range, the ability to choose where he comes out of Alpha Strike, his W stacking up his double strike and also preserving Highlander, his E being basically always up. There is not a bad aspect of this champion, and it is really starting to show. He's been sitting higher than average win rate for a while now, but the absence of strong early game ganking junglers as well as the early game invade junglers have really allowed him to come through. Kindred is nerfed, Jarvan is nerfed, Graves has been nerfed a couple of times, so Yi is able to run amok in the early game and then run away with basically any match. Most of the meta solo laners also struggle really hard into Yi. He can itemize to shred tanks and bruisers in the top lane, his kit straight up counters champions like Orianna and Syndra in the mid lane, the strong junglers can't keep him down, and the strong bot laners are all scaling champions that rely on Trinity Force, which Yi eats like butter. The only problem champions for Yi at the moment are going to be enchanters and their supports and lower elos. They do not stand a chance at stopping him if he's able to snowball his top side or even his mid lane. Overall, just a really solid champ right now. Funnily enough, one of Yi's counters is next on our list. That is going to be Rammus. This champion was nerfed very heavily when they updated the jungle pets and they gave them an armor and MR scaling. Since then, Riot has reverted this nerf and once again made Rammus broken. There are zero, and I mean zero, 80 junglers that are good into Rammus at the moment. Trundle is a decent counter for Rammus because we're able to steal all of his resistances, but Trundle can't even deal with Rammus' spam ganking nature. This champion simply has too much pressure on the map, he scales really hard, and he's able to ignore basically everybody past a certain point, and to top it off, he beats Briar, Nocturne, and Yi, who are all in our OP tier. what is not to love about this champ? Add him to your pool, deal with all the Briar, Nocturne, and Yi abusers. And finally, we have the 2 jungle AD Titans. Nocturne has been ultra busted for months. The Bruiser item update only made this champion more effective than he already was, which was quite effective to begin with. Stridebreaker Lethal Tempo Nocturne wins basically every duel, his ultimate is constantly up because it's on such a laughably low cooldown, and he's really easy to pilot. In Season 14, it looks like he's going to be just as strong, if not stronger. You need to be playing this champion now. And finally, the last OP tier champion on this tier list. When will it end? This champion has been nerfed, I think, 6 times in a row, and she is still broken. It is so tiring seeing this champion non-stop picked and banned. Briar is going to be the queen of the jungle on the final patch of League in this season. You know, I really thought that the last set of nerfs were going to bring this champion down finally, because they were quite harsh, but so were the set of nerfs before that. I don't know, man. Clearly a champion that heals off of the amount of damage that she deals is going to be hard to balance. If Briar doesn't deal enough damage, she won't heal enough, which removes her drain tank playstyle. The problem with this is that she's tuned to such an extent that it's better to go Assassin on Briar so you can one-shot somebody and also heal for over 1,000 health throughout the duration of your combo. I don't think that this champion needs a rework, but holy, has this release been one of the worst that I've seen in a long time. She takes a couple of games getting used to, but once you get the hang of her, ultra easy to play and very effective in every single elo bracket. Anyways, this is Unsung Gamely. Thank you all for watching and I hope that you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.